This is a Hog Sports Network podcast. You're listening to the Whole Hog Football Podcast, bringing you the latest news, analysis, and more. Here's your host, Matt Jones, with Scotty Bordelon of the Hog Sports Network and WholeHogSports.com.
Almost time for Arkansas' second game of the season. Razorbacks will play Kent State on Saturday at Razorback Stadium, 3 o'clock kickoff on SEC Network. A lot of people are going to be there. Don't know that they're going to get much of a game. If they do, they'll probably leave a little bit disappointed. Arkansas enters this game a 37.5-point favorite over Kent State, and it's been a long time since I can remember the Razorbacks being favored to win a game by that much against another FBS team. With Scotty Bordelon and Ethan Westerman, I'm Matt Jones. We'll take a look today at Kent State here in a few minutes. But first, the big news for the Razorbacks going into this game is that Rocket Sanders is not going to be able to play. Sam Pittman announced that on his radio show Wednesday night. Sanders dealing with a little bit of inflammation and swelling around one of his knees. It's kept him out of practice this week. I think there was a little bit of optimism that he might be able to practice on Wednesday and play in the game. That's not the case. He's not going to play this week. Pittman said that he might also be out for next week's game against BYU. That's still to be determined. But Scotty, as you look at this from a Razorback perspective, from a run game perspective, Rashad Dubinion was back in practice this week. How do you see this game being influenced by the fact that Rocket Sanders can't play in it?
Yeah, Rocket not being available isn't ideal, obviously. But I think if you go back to the Liberty Bowl last December, AJ Green and Rashad Dubinion had their best games of the year after Rocket left that game with an injury. So they're not totally unfamiliar with kind of the dynamic that is in the running back room right now with the star being out. And I think they'll handle it fine. I think it's an opportunity for AJ Green to just have a day. I know a lot of the run game is predicated on what the O-line can do, and I think there's a greater chance for run game success this week, or it at least sounds that way. With Brady Latham coming back, Bo Limmer I think has had some issues with his hand. But when we were walking off the practice field Tuesday, the offense was getting ready to go against the scout team defense. And the offensive line, from what I could tell, the 5 guys that were walking over there, it looked like what you would hope the offensive line would have looked like for game one. With Latham in there, with Limmer in there, with Josh Braun, and I think with Josh Braun at the spot that he worked at, throughout the preseason. So yeah, I think it's a big chance for those guys. And if Arkansas is able to, put the game away fairly easily, I think you could even get some reps for a guy like Isaiah Augustave. I think he ran the ball pretty well in limited time last weekend, and be interested to see what Dominic Johnson's role is. Sam has said that, he could probably get out there and play without the brace on that knee that he's had a couple surgeries on, but it's kind of up to him. I would kind of expect him to have maybe a dual role where maybe he gets some carries, but maybe they throw him in there at that fullback position too, maybe toward the goal line, and maybe they hand it to him. He's a good guy to have in short yardage.
I'm interested to see this week how much they run KJ Jefferson, because they didn't run him last week. They kind of withheld him intentionally. He ran some, that's not to say he didn't run the ball. He had a quarterback keeper on the goal line. He had the touchdown run where it looked like he pulled it away from Dominic Johnson, had a rushing loss added to his stats because he had a sack. But obviously it was not the typical KJ Jefferson game from a running perspective. Ethan, you watched the Kent State UCF game where UCF just ran at will. I think they ran for something like 389 yards, averaged a lot of yards per carry against this Kent State defense. It'll be interesting, I think, to see if Jefferson's running game is increased this week because of Sanders being out. It feels like it's I don't know, maybe a delicate deal there, because you don't want to run him too much and risk him getting hurt against a team like Kent State. But on the other hand, you may need him a little bit more than you needed him last week.
Yeah, and Kent State in that week 1 game, they played John Rhys Plumlee's the quarterback for UCF, and if you remember him when he was at Ole Miss, he's really fast. So he's a dual threat option, but kind of what Coach Burns was saying this week, him and KJ are similar but really different. He said that Plumlee just is really good with his feet, and it was like almost like, he doesn't even get through his progression before he starts taking off, and they just couldn't keep up with him. He said that what stood out to him about KJ watching film is just he said that he impressed him with his arm and how the run game really it just comes natural for him if he goes through his progression and he goes through his reads and there's nothing there, how he's just kind of good naturally making a play out of nothing. So I'm not sure that KJ is really going to be looking, at least Kent State doesn't think he's going to be looking to run much against them. They were more impressed with his arm, but I do think that, you can't watch them give up. I think it was like 90 something rush yards to another dual threat quarterback last week and not expect KJ to maybe have some opportunities to show off his legs. But yeah, the running game for UCF, yeah, it was 389 yards, and they set a school record of something like 8.5 yards a carry. So they were able to run at will. Probably, I mean, I was thinking about it, for a week to not have Rocket Sanders. I mean, this is maybe the one that you're not really, really sweating too much that he's out, because it seems like anybody could really have a day against him.
I remember a couple of years ago, maybe it was Sam said this at the Hogs Illustrated luncheon we had, not this year, but last year. And I think he said that he learned that to get KJ going, he had to put the ball in KJ's hands and let him run with it a little bit. Maybe that got him a little bit amped and, maybe into the flow of a game. I think with KJ's progression and his maturity and maybe, learning from Dan Enos in the last year, I think KJ might be to the point where it doesn't really matter what you do with him early in a game. And I think he'd probably be just as comfortable, maybe even more comfortable now, throwing the ball, to maybe get himself going. I don't think it's worth running. I mean, we may see KJ run, maybe upwards of 5 times, 6 times in this game, but I think you've got to try to limit the body blows that he takes before the schedule starts getting really tough.
I think what you're saying there, you think he's going to be a smarter runner this year than last year whenever he was trying to take impact, it felt like.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think it's all about like your confidence in your ability in the pocket too. And I think KJ's raised his, level of play, being comfortable in the pocket. Like I mean, you mentioned it a lot in the preseason, like the footwork, I think, has allowed him, maybe a little bit more time to maybe step up in the pocket or sidestep, pass rushers or whatever, and get throws off. And he doesn't necessarily feel like at the first sign of potential trouble, he's got to take off and run. And I think that right there, I think, is a showcase of KJ's maturity. And I just don't think we'll see KJ run a whole lot. And if he does, I think he'll be, he may try to send a message, obviously, and he's never been a guy to shy away from contact, but man, you got to be smart. You got to be really smart. And I think we'll probably still see KJ throw the ball much more than he pulls it down and runs it.
I almost wonder if there's a little bit this week trying to get the RPO on track. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but they didn't use it against Western Carolina hardly at all. And you got this stretch coming up where you're going to play BYU and then a bunch of SEC teams right in a row. Maybe just trying to get a few game reps with that. I think it's interesting to watch. I don't know if we'll see it, but it's just something I think that is that's interesting to track this week. We mentioned on the podcast Tuesday that in the preseason, Bill Connolly of ESPN and his S&P rankings had Kent State 132nd out of 133 FBS teams. Well, after they lose by 50 against UCF in week 1, they fell to 133rd. They are officially, maybe unofficially, the worst team in FBS. And essentially with these S&P rankings, what they do is they look at your offensive efficiency and your defensive efficiency, and they kind of spit out a number that says your defense gives up this many points, your offense is projected to give up or score this many points, and here's your difference. Well, for Kent State right now, the difference is that the projections show they're going to give up 30 points more on average than they are going to score. And so that's why they're 133rd in this projection. Arkansas, on the flip side, is ranked 19th right now in the S&P rankings with an average differential of about 16 to 17 points per game. Ethan, you've been sounding this alarm since the preseason. when you really started to look into Western Carolina and Kent State. You said you thought Western Carolina might be a tougher game for Arkansas than Kent State. Arkansas wins that one by 43. I asked Sam Pittman this week, do you kind of have to guard a little bit against Matt looking at those scores last week? You know, you win by 43, they lose by 50. Can it be hard to get your team's focus? And I think that's a key to this week is not overlooking Kent State.
Yeah, no, for sure. I don't think you can ever overlook an FBS team with FBS talent. But I will say, I do think I'll stand by what I was saying all preseason, that this is maybe the easiest team on the schedule this year, at least on paper. It was just so many question marks from entering this year with a new coach and all new pieces, offense and defense. I mean, they have 0 returners on offense, 4 returners on defense. So it was just a bunch of unknown for them, and they're just trying to get their footing going right now. In that game against UCF, they just looked outmanned at pretty much every facet of the game, except for maybe special teams. They have a pretty good kicker, but they just look like right now the talent gap and probably just the chemistry as well with all those new guys trying to play together. They don't look ready to be playing SEC teams like Arkansas. I know last year it was kind of a surprise that they played Georgia somewhat close. And that team, I think, won 4 games in the MAC. This team, it's much worse than that team last year. I think that Saturday could get ugly fast. And like I said, probably a good game for, to get Rocket Sanders healthy. You have a bunch of good backs. So it might be a time to utilize that depth. I know Jimmy Smith all preseason, he harped on how his backs have to earn their keep, and because he thought that he had such a talented room. So this might be a week where you really see Arkansas. I know that Kenny Burns, he said he expects Arkansas to come out and try and run the ball, especially after last week, kind of feeling like they might have gotten embarrassed a little in the run game. So, yeah, I think that this is not really your typical FBS opponent.
I hate to say the word sleepwalk, but it almost feels, Scotty, like Arkansas could sleepwalk through this game and still come out a winner. It just seems like the talent differential is that great.
Yeah, it really is. And I think, I don't really know what to expect from Arkansas's offense. Like, are they going to try to turn around and hand the ball off just to say that they improved their run game week over week? Like, I don't know. Like, I think the pass game was so efficient in week 1 that I think you try to hammer a team with what you're really good at right now, and then maybe, I don't know, maybe you sprinkle some run game in there too. But like the way the offense operated last week with KJ throwing the ball, it was like they could pretty much do whatever they wanted. And now you got a team that's potentially worse than the team you played in week 1 when you had your way. Like that, it seems like an easy recipe for, for you to get out of week 2. I don't want to say as quickly as possible, but like without utilizing, just all of your energy. I think Arkansas's defense has a chance to, maybe suffocate Kent State's offense. I don't exactly know what Kent State put up offensively last week, but 6 points against UCF doesn't really inspire a whole lot of confidence, I don't think. And I think Arkansas's defensive line's really got a chance to, kind of impose its will, because, I think Ethan mentioned that they're working in, 5 new offensive linemen, a true freshman at center. And if you look at Arkansas on the interior of its defensive line, it's just a bunch of big dudes that have played a lot of ball. And I think the interior of Kent State's offensive line goes sophomore, true freshman, redshirt sophomore. And Arkansas doesn't have, I think Cam Ball might be the youngest guy that Arkansas throws on the interior of the D line. So they might have their way there.
Yeah, and Kenny Burns, he really did touch on, kind of recapping that game, how much having a completely new offensive line and a true freshman center, like that's just a tough task to try and play. UCF, I keep forgetting they're a Big 12 team now. To go up
That's
against
right.
a Power 5 opponent with a completely new line with a freshman center, that's going to be hard to run the ball against those guys. I think that I think that they are just kind of outmanned. I don't know any better term to use than against. They're going to be outmanned against most Power 5 opponents and probably most MAC opponents as well.
I sure hope for Arkansas' sake they take Kent State a little bit more seriously than we do, because we just don't think that this is going to be a very competitive game.
I definitely think that it's one of those deals, though. I think we touched on it earlier in this week that Arkansas has enough positions right now, especially defensively, where you know a lot of guys are rotating in and out. That I think players still have that drive where they feel like they got to kind of prove themselves. So it's almost, I think the depth has added a lot of help for these. You know, what you consider a cupcake game, where there's, I think, a lot of guys that are still trying to prove themselves and aren't going to go and take Kent State lightly because they're trying to, you know, the same way in practice you're trying to prove yourself. This is a bigger stage than practice. They're going out there and trying to prove themselves.
Yeah, I didn't know if we were going to do a prediction segment specifically on this game and do a score again, but I've been kind of teetering whether or not to go with like a 40-point shutout. Like that's kind of where I am mentally with this game. And Sam said yesterday on the Zoom call that he did Wednesday afternoon that after Tuesday's practice, he kind of told the guys, he was like, hey, I didn't like the way that we kind of approach things today. And he's like, I hope we're not going to be a team that has to learn a lesson and is the talk of college football for the wrong reason because we just like didn't show up and, didn't play with good energy and effort. So I think by Tuesday, I think Sam definitely, if he didn't already have the team's attention, like I think Tuesday was kind of a, hey, we got like, we feel really good about our chances of beating the hell out of this team, but like we still do have to show up on Saturday. I think they will.
I don't know exactly what it was that Josh Braun said whenever he spoke with media earlier this week, but I mean, it seemed to me like they're pretty locked in. I think it was something along the lines of last week was last week, this week is this week. We gotta like those two have nothing to do with each other. It seems like at least from that media availability that the coaches have probably really hammered into them that they got to take this opponent seriously.
Hey, we are going to do predictions, and we'll have those coming up here in just a second. First, I want to tell you that the Whole Hog Football Podcast is sponsored by Kindle King Design Display Signage, KindleKing.com. That's KendleKing.com.
The Kindle King Group family of companies plays to win, just like our hogs. We know how demanding retail marketing is today. From digital omnichannel creative services, through in-store signing and displays, and finally to social influence, we've got you covered. Our KKG Inc. family of companies, Kindle King, Shopcart Creative, and Soapbox Influence are winning with multiple retailers and brands. We play to win and will be a winning partner for all your retail marketing service needs. Go Hogs!
Get the latest breaking news on all Arkansas Razorback sports at WholeHogSports.com. Our award-winning reporters and photographers go beyond game recaps to bring our subscribers the most trusted Razorbacks news anywhere. With expert analysis, the latest in recruiting, plus unique and compelling stories of your favorite teams. Subscribe today at WholeHogSports.com.
Arkansas and Kent State Saturday on SEC Network. Don't be surprised if you're a Spectrum customer and you turn on your TV Saturday and you can't get Arkansas Kent State. There's this huge carriage dispute between Disney and Spectrum going on, and I'm getting my emails is blowing up with statements from different. I see where the SEC has put out a statement, ESPN's putting out a statement, Spectrum's putting out all these statements. Spectrum's not really a big carrier in our area, but we know that there are Razorback fans all over the place, and this is something that affects a good many of them who are trying to watch the game. So just be prepared. This is one of two big carriage disputes that's going on right now. You've got another one that affects us locally between DirecTV and Nexstar. It's crazy how this is working, and football's being dangled as kind of a carrot in the negotiations. But Arkansas Kent State, just make sure you know how to watch it, and don't be surprised when you turn on your TV Saturday if you can't get it. We'll talk about Arkansas Kent State here in just a minute as we look around the SEC games this week. The big one is Alabama and Texas. We'll talk about that one here in just a minute. But there's some games, maybe you call them undercards a little bit, that are kind of intriguing. And we'll start here with Auburn going to California Saturday night. It's going to be a late kickoff, Pac-12 after dark. Enjoy it while you can. It's going to be on ESPN. Auburn, its first big Power 5 game with Hugh Freeze as their coach, Scotty.
Yeah, I haven't looked a ton into either team, but I do follow some Auburn writers on Twitter, and Auburn's run defense wasn't exactly sharp last week against UMass, and Cal I think ran for a bunch of yards in their opener. So that's kind of maybe something to keep an eye on, but I think Auburn, man for man, is probably the better team.
Yeah, I think that Auburn should win this game, and they probably will win this game. I don't know if y'all watched any of that game against UMass last week, the highlights, but they were utilizing Robbie Ashford like in the red zone, and it was working. It was interesting to see Hugh Freeze do that two-man quarterback type of game, but their offense looked great. I mean, I don't remember how many points they scored. It was northward of 50. And I mean, that's not saying a ton because it's UMass. They've kind of been perpetually at the bottom of college football in recent history, but yeah, I think that they should beat Cal.
There should be some blowouts in the SEC this week. Some other games. Ball State goes to Georgia. Eastern Kentucky plays at Kentucky. Austin Peay is at Tennessee. Middle Tennessee State at Missouri. Grambling at LSU. McNeese at Florida. Furman at South Carolina. A bunch of throwaway games here in week 2. Kind of an intriguing one. We won't pick it, but Vanderbilt goes to Wake Forest. That'll be Saturday morning on the ACC network. Late Saturday night, Arizona goes to Mississippi State. This is the return game from last year when Mississippi State went to Tucson and won that game. Similar to Auburn with Hugh Freeze, this is the first game for Mississippi State under their new coach Arnett against a Power 5 opponent. Scotty?
Yeah, again, because we traveled last weekend, I didn't watch a whole lot of games and didn't really read up on many of them outside of the SEC recap that we had on the site. But I like a Zach Arnett defense. I think early in the season, you said the game's in Starkville, right?
That's right.
Yeah, I like Mississippi State's defense. I think they'll do plenty to win that game.
Yeah, it's interesting watching this new look Mississippi State where they're running the ball a lot on offense. Their running back Marks, I think he had north of 100 yards and maybe a touchdown or two against who was it they played last week?
I couldn't tell you. I don't
Southeast
know.
Louisiana. It was
There you go.
Southeast Louisiana. Yeah, they but it was just interesting watching them run the ball as much as they did. I think we've grown so accustomed to watching Will Rogers just sling it all around. But yeah, I think that I think just the setup of this one, it being in Starkville at night, it's kind of setting up for the type of game that Mississippi State will probably win, and I think they'll probably win by quite a bit.
I just realized I didn't give an Auburn-Cal prediction. I'm going to take Auburn there. Justin Wilcox at California always puts good defenses on the field, but their offense has been terrible, so I've got Auburn in that game. I don't know what to do about Arizona, Mississippi State. It's at home in Starkville. Arizona played them pretty well last season. You got the first-year coach, Mississippi State. I'm not sold on Arnett. I'm going to go Arizona. I don't know why. I'm just going to say I think Arizona goes into Starkville and pulls off that upset on Saturday night. Like I said, the game that's getting all the attention this week is Texas-Alabama, but I think there are a couple of really sneaky good games in the SEC where SEC teams go on the road and play out of conference. One of them, Texas A&M goes to Miami. They played a low-scoring game last year in College Station. A&M, of course, with Bobby Petrino as the offensive coordinator. They had a good start last week against New Mexico. Miami got off to a great start last week, won 38-3 in its opener. How do you see this one going, Scotty?
Yeah, I watched the Miami against Miami of Ohio game last night. I had some entertainment value in that game. And Miami, Florida, they got some dudes on defense. And I'm not exactly sure how well-oiled the A&M offense is yet, but I'm sure Bobby Petrino's got some stuff up his sleeve for Miami. But if you just look at the speed and the size of Miami's defense, especially their front, I think they could give Texas A&M some problems. I just don't think it's going to be clicking on all cylinders yet for Texas A&M. I'll go with Miami at home.
I'm going to go with Texas A&M. I do think Miami's greatly improved. It was funny, their game was against Miami, Ohio. It was the Battle of the Miamis. Got a little confusing there, but they looked really good in that game, held them to 3 points. I think the A&M, though, I watched spurts of that game. You can already tell the Bobby Petrino effect of the offense. Their quarterback, Connor Wegman, he looked really sharp. I think he had one of the highest quarterback ratings of all of week one. Passed for 5 touchdowns. He and he had a good connection with Evan Stewart. If you remember, he was a really high recruit last year, but didn't really do much. Probably just that was an indicator of what Texas A&M did as a whole last year. Had a lot of talent, but didn't really see much production. But I think that they're gonna go into Miami and win this one. I just don't think that the talent gap right now is there for Miami to match up with them, especially with Bobby Petrino offense looking the way it did in week one.
Miami, it's a big game for Mario Cristobal. Still early in his tenure there. They're at home. I'm sure they're going to get a lot of people out to watch this game. I don't know who to pick here, but I'm going with Texas A&M. I watched the game last year. Texas A&M was a lot more physical along the line of scrimmage than Miami was, and so that's kind of where I go. A&M has got a pretty good defensive line back again this season. Another game, this will be a mid-afternoon kickoff on ESPN2. Ole Miss goes to Tulane. Really intriguing matchup there. You got Tulane obviously beat USC in the bowl game last season. Ole Miss got off to a great start. They whipped an FCS opponent in week one. How do you see this one going?
Yeah, I like Jackson Dart a lot. I think I was looking at the Pro Football Focus numbers just to see how Arkansas's guys did, obviously in week one. I wanted to see where KJ Jefferson stacked up with like other quarterbacks in the country. And I think Jackson Dart was one of the highest graded guys in week one. I don't think this will be much of an issue for Ole Miss, even though there's some. I always have questions about Ole Miss defense, obviously, but I think their offense and Jackson Dart, they can put up enough points to win.
This game is really intriguing for me because I think that if Tulane can get past this game, they could maybe pull a UCF of recent history and run the table. And I mean, because right now the American Conference, with all the subtractions that they had this year, it's just not as strong as it's been. Probably their biggest test from there would be Texas San Antonio maybe, but this is a toss-up in my head. I think that Tulane is really good. They beat South Alabama last week, who is, I think, receiving some votes to be ranked. I don't know a lot about them, but I'm guessing that they're pretty solid. I don't know why I'm going to pick Tulane. I just think playing that in New Orleans might be a little bit of a shock for Ole Miss early in the year, playing a team like Tulane that, had a really good year last year and obviously has some talent.
I picked Tulane too. I think they've got some really good talent. They may get blown off the field Saturday, but I think Willie Fritz can really coach. They've got their quarterback, some skill players back from last season. They beat USC. This is a team that in the past has taken Oklahoma to the mat in Norman. They didn't play well against Ole Miss a couple of years ago in Oxford. They got blown off the field that day. But I just think that there's something about Willie Fritz that makes me think that he's a really calm, composed, good head coach. And I don't know that you can say the same thing about Lane Kiffin. His offenses are always great, but there's always something about discipline with Ole Miss that seems like it bites them in some of these games. You saw it last year where they lost, I think, their last 5 games of the season. So I got Tulane. It's an upset. It may not go my way, but I've got Tulane on Saturday. Texas goes to Alabama. Of course, it was a great game last season when Alabama kicked the field goal late to beat the Longhorns in Austin. This week it'll be in Tuscaloosa, and I think Texas probably has Alabama's attention this time around.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Alabama looked pretty good week one. I mean, not really surprising, honestly, playing Middle Tennessee State, but they may have found their guy in Jalen Milroe. He looked pretty sharp last week. He didn't throw for just a ton of yards. We had 3 touchdowns through the air, ran for a couple more. I think he's super talented. Like, we saw that firsthand last year when Alabama came here. He looks like a running back or a linebacker at quarterback. I hope it's a good game, but it's really hard to go into Alabama and play well and compete for 4 quarters. I think it takes a really, really, really good team to do that. I like Alabama.
I like Alabama too. I think, like you said, Milroe looked really sharp last week, and I just think that might have been kind of the confidence he needed before this game started. Really good quarterback battle between him and Quinn Ewers. If this was in Texas, I would maybe more inclined to give them a chance, but I just don't see Alabama dropping a game to Texas at home this early in the year.
This is always the point in the year where Texas gets humbled. They're hyped up in the preseason. They play somebody good, they get humbled. I know they played Alabama really good last year, but I just think Alabama gives Texas a dose of humility, wins by big in Tuscaloosa this weekend. Finally, Arkansas and Kent State. The Razorbacks, as we said, a 37.5-point favorite. We think they're going to win big. The question, Scotty, do they cover?
Yes, I think they do. I think I'm actually going to go with a 45-0 shutout.
I can't be doing all this Kent State research in the offseason and talking about how bad I think they are and say I don't think Arkansas is going to cover. So I'm going to say Arkansas will cover. If I'm going to give a score prediction, I think I'm going to go with somewhere like kind of similar to UCF. I think like 56-3 or 6, maybe 10.
37.5 points. That's a lot to cover, even against a bad team. I say they don't cover, and I say that because I think that they play ball control in the second half and just try to get out there without any more injuries. Maybe they get off to a great start like they did against Western Carolina last week, and they do get up to a point where you can cover a 38-point spread. Well, that's a lot of points to cover. So I think Arkansas wins big. I think 38 points is a lot of points, but hey, we'll see. Maybe they do it. If they win by 38 and they beat Western Carolina by 43 last week, I think you got to feel really good about where they're at through 2 weeks, even if the opposition has not been very good, because that's what a team is supposed to do to a team that's not as good. You know what I mean? You're supposed to impose your will on those types of teams. So Arkansas, Kent State on Saturday afternoon. Hope you'll come to wholehogsports.com. Before the game, you can read mine and Scotty's keys to the game. You can also read Ethan's scouting report on Kent State. And then we'll have all kinds of coverage after the game this weekend when the Razorbacks and the Golden Flashes play in Fayetteville. Be back with another Whole Hog Football podcast early next week to look back at Kent State and take an early look ahead to Arkansas BYU. Until then, for Scotty Bordelon and Ethan Westerman, I'm Matt Jones. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the Whole Hog Football podcast.
The proceeding has been a production of the Hog Sports Network. Look for our daily podcasts on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. For more Razorbacks coverage, go to wholehogsports.com or follow the Hog Sports Network reporters on social media.